There comes a moment in every person's life when God's silence feels louder than any prayer. These are the days when you wake up in the morning with an inexplicable weight on your chest, when tears come without warning, and the answers you've been seeking simply don't arrive. It is in this setting of deep anguish that Psalm 13 reveals itself as one of the most honest and transformative passages in the entire Bible. This psalm was not written for perfect people who never doubt, but for broken hearts that must learn to trust even when everything seems lost. The author of this psalm is King David, a man who knew the extremes of human experience. He was anointed king while still young, but spent years hiding in caves while King Saul tried to kill him. David experienced the glory of great military victories, but he also knew the pain of family betrayal and the heavy burden of guilt for his own sins. When we read his words in Psalm 13, we are not hearing theories about suffering written by someone who lived in an ivory tower. We are hearing the genuine cry of a man on the edge, who didn't know how much longer he could endure. The psalm begins with a question that echoes in the hearts of millions around the world: "How long, O Lord?" This question is not asked just once, but 4 times in only 2 verses. David is desperate and he doesn't hide it. He asks how long God will forget him, how long he will hide his face, how long he must wrestle with his own thoughts, how long his enemies will triumph over him. These questions reveal a soul in deep suffering, someone tired of waiting, tired of fighting, tired of not seeing change. What makes this psalm so special is precisely this brutal honesty. David doesn't try to mask his emotions with pretty words or empty religious phrases. He doesn't begin by saying, "I know God is in control," or "all things work together for good." No. He begins with raw pain, with the real feeling of abandonment, with the genuine fear that maybe God isn't paying attention. And it is exactly for this reason that this psalm connects so deeply with people of all times, because all of us have been, or will be, in that place where it seems that God has forgotten us. Many people grow up in religious environments where expressing doubt or questioning God is not allowed. They are taught from an early age that doubting is a sin, that questioning shows a lack of faith, that a true believer must always smile and declare victory no matter what is happening inside. This kind of teaching creates false Christians, people who wear masks in church but are dying inside. Psalm 13 gives us permission to be real with God. It shows us that we can bring our deepest sorrows into His presence without fear of rejection. When David asks, "How long will you hide your face from me?" he is expressing something that goes beyond a simple complaint. In Hebrew culture, the face of God represented His presence, His favor, and His attention. When a king hid his face from someone, it meant rejection or indifference. David is saying that he feels completely ignored by God, as if his prayers are hitting a concrete ceiling and returning empty. How many people today wake up with that same feeling? How many pray and pray but feel only emptiness? How many go to church, sing songs of praise, but leave with an even heavier heart because it seems that God is silent? The truth is that God's silence does not mean His absence. This is one of the hardest concepts to grasp when we are in the middle of the storm. Our human minds are wired to interpret silence as indifference. When someone we love stops talking to us, it usually means something is wrong in the relationship. But God doesn't work like people. Sometimes He is silent not because He has abandoned us, but because He is working in areas of our lives that we cannot yet see. Sometimes silence is the necessary environment for our faith to grow beyond dependence on constant signs and confirmations. David continues his lament by saying that he has sorrow in his heart every day. Here we see the description of someone experiencing depression. It's not a passing sadness, but something that has become his daily companion. He wakes up with it, goes to sleep with it, and carries that crushing weight all day long. For those who have never experienced depression or deep anxiety, it can be hard to understand this battle. It's not simply a matter of thinking positively or having more faith. It's a real, daily, exhausting struggle that consumes physical, mental, and spiritual energy. What's interesting here is that David is not being attacked by an external problem at this moment. He mentions enemies, yes, but the main source of his suffering is internal. It's the anguish of his own soul, the sadness of his own heart. This teaches us something crucial. Our greatest enemies are not always external circumstances. Sometimes, the hardest battle takes place within ourselves. The thoughts that torment us, the memories that haunt us, the fears that paralyze us, the doubts that consume us. And often, these inner battles are invisible to those around us, which makes them even more lonely. In the 3rd verse, there is a subtle but significant shift in the tone of the psalm. David stops merely lamenting and begins to pray actively. He says, "Look on me and answer, Lord my God." Even in the midst of despair, even feeling that God has hidden his face, David still calls him, "my God." That's a powerful detail. He doesn't say, "Oh God," in a distant, generic way. He says, "My God," keeping the relationship alive even when he doesn't feel the divine presence. That is true faith, not the absence of doubt, but the choice to remain committed even when your emotions are screaming the opposite. David asks God to light up my eyes, so that he will not sleep in death. This is a poetic way of asking for renewal, energy, and hope. He's saying, "God, I need something to keep me going. I'm at my limit. If you don't intervene, I won't make it." There's tremendous vulnerability in these words. David, the great warrior, the giant slayer, the king of Israel, is admitting that he can't go on alone. And perhaps that's exactly where God wanted him to arrive. One of the problems with self-sufficiency is that it prevents us from experiencing the miracle of divine provision. When we think we can handle everything on our own, we never really need God. But when we come to the end of ourselves, when our strength is gone, when our strategies fail, that's when we finally make room for God to be God. David's despair wasn't just a bad phase he was going through. It was the place where his dependence on God would be renewed and deepened in ways that prosperity never could. In the next verse, David expresses his fear that his enemies will say they have prevailed over him, that his adversaries will rejoice when he falls. Here we see a very human concern, the fear of being ridiculed, of giving others a reason to doubt God because of our own failure. How many people carry extra weight in their suffering because they worry about what others will think? If I admit I'm struggling with depression, they'll say my faith is weak. If I confess my doubts, they'll judge me. If I show that I'm breaking down, they'll use it against me. That fear of judgment can be as heavy as the original problem itself. And this is where healthy faith communities make all the difference. When the church functions as it should, it is a hospital for sinners, not a museum for saints. It's a place where broken people can come and be honest about their struggles without fear of condemnation. Unfortunately, many religious communities end up doing the opposite, creating environments where people have to pretend everything is fine, where vulnerability is seen as weakness, and where struggling means failing. But then something extraordinary happens in the last two verses of Psalm 13. After all the lament, after all the anguished questions, after expressing his deepest despair, David makes a surprising choice. He says, "But I trust in your unfailing love, my heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me." This is not just a forced happy ending tacked onto a sad story. It's a deliberate decision to trust in spite of everything. Notice that David doesn't say his circumstances have changed. He hasn't received a clear answer to his questions. The problem that tormented him hasn't necessarily been solved. But something has changed within him. He chooses to remember God's goodness. He decides to trust in God's character even when he cannot see the path ahead. He chooses to praise not based on his present situation, but on the history of what God has already done in his life. This is one of the most powerful lessons of Psalm 13. Mature faith is not the kind that never questions, but the kind that chooses to trust despite the questions. It's not faith that never feels pain, but the kind that praises through the pain. It's not faith that always understands, but faith that submits even without understanding. David shows us that it's possible to move from anguish to praise, not because something external has changed, but because something internal has been transformed through the decision to trust. When he says, "I will sing to the Lord," he's using the verb in the future tense, but it can also be understood as a present decision. It's as if he were saying, "I will sing. Even if I don't feel like it now, even if tears are still wetting my face, I choose to sing." Praise here isn't a spontaneous emotion, but a conscious sacrifice. It's what the Bible elsewhere calls a sacrifice of praise, offering worship to God even when it costs something, even when it goes against what we're feeling. There's something deeply therapeutic about choosing praise in the midst of pain. It's not that we should deny our emotions or pretend everything is fine when it isn't. David certainly didn't do that. He spent the first verses being brutally honest about his anguish. But after expressing all his pain, he made the conscious choice to shift his focus from his problems to God's character. And in that shift of focus, something within him began to change. This teaches us an important truth about how to process our suffering in a healthy way. First, we need to be honest about what we feel. Repressing emotions isn't spirituality, it's denial, and eventually it takes a toll. David gives us permission to scream, to question, to cry, to express frustration. God is big enough to handle our honesty. He prefers our raw sincerity to our polished but empty prayers. Second, after expressing what we feel, we need to make a conscious choice about where we'll fix our attention. We can keep ruminating on our problems, mentally replaying everything that's wrong, sinking deeper into a pit of negativity. Or we can, like David, deliberately turn our focus to who God is and what He has already done. This isn't escapism or denial. It's a way to gain perspective, to remember that our current situation isn't the whole story. When David says that God has been good to him, he's taking inventory of divine faithfulness. Even in the middle of the present storm, he looks back and recognizes moments when God rescued him, sustained him, and guided him. This practice of remembering is vital to our spiritual and emotional health. Our brains have a natural tendency, especially during stress or depression, to fixate on the negative and forget the positive. This is called the negativity bias, and it's one of the reasons we must intentionally cultivate gratitude and memory. In Jewish tradition, there's a concept called Ebenezer, a stone of remembrance. When God did something significant for the people of Israel, they would set up a stone as a memorial, a physical reminder of divine faithfulness. When hard times came, they could look at those stones and remember, God helped us before. He can help us again. We also need our Ebenezers, our stones of remembrance. It could be a journal where we write down blessings we've received. It could be conversations with friends who remind us of how God has delivered us in the past. It could be returning to Bible passages that once brought us comfort. Psalm 13 also teaches us about the cyclical nature of the journey of faith. It's not a straight upward line from doubt to absolute certainty. It's more like a spiral, where sometimes we return to emotional places we thought we had already overcome. David wrote 150 psalms, and in many of them he expresses the same kinds of questions and anguish. He didn't get over his struggles once and for all. But each time he went through that process of honesty followed by a choice to trust, his faith grew stronger in a way that constant prosperity never could. This frees us from the unrealistic expectation that once we've learned the lesson, or won that battle, we'll never face it again. The Christian life isn't about reaching a permanent state of victory where we never struggle again. It's about learning to fight better each time, about developing spiritual and emotional tools that help us walk through valleys with more hope, even when they're still deep. Another important dimension of Psalm 13 is what it teaches about the importance of community. Although the psalm is a personal expression of David, it was preserved and included in the Book of Psalms for Israel's corporate use. In other words, David's personal suffering became a resource for the whole community. His pain was transformed into something that could help others. How many people over the centuries have found comfort in these words precisely because David was brave enough to be vulnerable? This challenges us to consider how our own pain can become a gift to others. Not that we should exploit our suffering or make it our identity. But when we process our struggles in a healthy way and allow God to heal us, our story of healing can become a beacon of hope for others still in the storm. There is tremendous power in hearing from someone who has been where you are and came out the other side. Not someone who never struggled, but someone who struggled and overcame, or even someone who is still struggling but can honestly say, I don't know how this will end, but I still choose to trust. Psalm 13 also invites us to rethink our understanding of spiritual success. In many religious circles, success is measured by external circumstances: financial prosperity, perfect health, conflict-free relationships, thriving ministries. But David shows us that true spiritual success is the ability to maintain faith in God even when all those things are missing. It's being able to say, but I trust, when all evidence suggests you should give up. This completely overturns the prosperity theology that has become so popular in many churches. That theology teaches that if you have enough faith, you'll never suffer, never get sick, never have financial problems. If something bad happens, it must be because your faith is weak or because there's hidden sin in your life. But Psalm 13 was written by a man described as a man after God's own heart, and yet he went through deep anguish. Clearly, suffering is not a sign of weak faith or distance from God. Part superior do formulario. Part inferior do formulario. In fact, sometimes suffering is the path through which God draws us closer to Him. C.S. Lewis, who lost his wife to cancer, wrote, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. Pain is God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world. It's not that God causes suffering, but He can certainly use it for purposes beyond our immediate understanding. When we think about applying Psalm 13 to our lives today, several concrete practices emerge. First, we need to create safe spaces where we can be honest about our struggles. This can be with a therapist, a spiritual mentor, a trusted small group, or even in a personal journal. The point is not to carry everything alone, not to pretend everything is fine when it isn't. Second, we must learn to distinguish between feelings and truths. David felt that God had forgotten him, but the truth is that God never abandoned him. Our feelings are valid and must be expressed, but we should not allow them to be the only determinants of our reality. We can acknowledge, "I feel abandoned," while also affirming, "But I know God promised never to leave me nor forsake me." Third, we need to cultivate the habit of remembering. Whether through a gratitude journal, regular conversations with friends about God's blessings, or simple intentional pauses during the day to recognize good things, we must train our minds to see divine faithfulness. This doesn't deny real suffering but places it within a larger context. Fourth, we need to learn that trusting God doesn't mean having all the answers. David ends the psalm with praise, but he still had no answer to his "how long?" questions. The resolution didn't come in the form of information, but in the form of inner transformation. He didn't know how or when God would act, but he chose to trust anyway. That's true faith, not the certainty of knowing what will happen, but the confidence in who is in control, regardless of what happens. Fifth, we must give ourselves permission for the process. David's journey from anguish to praise didn't happen instantly. The psalm documents a process, a movement. Sometimes we will be in the early verses, full of questions and pain. Sometimes we'll be in the last verses, able to praise despite our circumstances. And often we'll be somewhere in between, oscillating between despair and hope. All of this is part of an authentic journey of faith. It's also important to recognize that although Psalm 13 ends with renewed trust, that doesn't mean all our struggles will end the same way. Some people suffer from clinical depression that requires medical treatment. Some face circumstances that don't improve despite every prayer. Psalm 13 is not a magical formula guaranteeing that if we follow David's steps, we'll always come out smiling. It's an invitation to trust God within our realities, not as a way to escape them. When we think about feeling God's presence in hard days, we need to expand our definition of presence. Sometimes we expect God's presence to manifest as a warm emotion during worship or as a clear answer during prayer. But God's presence can also be the friend who calls at just the right time, the inexplicable strength to face another day, the small mercy in the midst of chaos, the peace that makes no sense given the circumstances. David experienced God's presence not primarily through changes in his circumstances, but through an inner change. In the same setting that drove him to despair, he found the capacity to trust and to praise. That is divine presence, not necessarily the removal of the problem, but the provision of grace to endure it. Psalm 13 invites us to a deeper and more authentic spirituality, one that goes beyond religious cliches and embraces the complexity of human experience. It's a spirituality unafraid of hard questions, that doesn't need neatly packaged answers, that can sit in God's silence without panic. It's a faith that can hold anguish and hope at the same time, that can cry, "How long?" and whisper, "But I trust," in the same breath. In the end, what Psalm 13 offers us is not a quick solution to suffering, but a model for how to walk through the valley of the shadow of death with integrity and hope. It shows us that we can be honest with God about our pain, that we can question without losing faith, that we can be broken and still choose to trust. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that we are not the first, nor will we be the last, to walk this difficult road. Generations of believers before us have made this same journey from doubt to trust, and their stories encourage us to keep going. May we have David's courage to be honest about our struggles, the wisdom to remember God's faithfulness, and the strength to choose trust even when all evidence suggests otherwise. Because in the end, it's not the absence of doubt that defines our faith, but the choice to trust despite it. And in that choice, even on the darkest days, we can find not only hope, but the real and sustaining presence of a God who never abandons us, even when it feels like He has hidden His face.